Hello, good morning, good evening, and welcome to our Learn Live session. My name is Robert Smith, and I'm an MVP for 14 years now. Follow me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And with me today is Tommaso. Tommaso, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Tommaso. I'm a cloud architect at Motion 10. Well, it's already here 10 o'clock in the evening. We live all both in the Netherlands, so here's already evening, but it's still morning in the USA. So it's nice to meet everybody.
Yes,
Um, yeah, so Robert,
indeed.
I think you can do the first part.
Yes, so let me introduce our moderator, right? So, because this is a live session and we like, questions, right? So, and there's the audience for. So, Dave is our moderator today, and he will answer all the questions. But as is a live session, we can also bring the questions directly to us, right? So we can answer them. So hopefully you give us good questions, and let's give it a start. So our design module about Azure Site Recovery for Azure. Well, it seems pretty complicated, but it isn't, right? So you can start this module on the aka.ms live 2020 1012H. Well, that's a pretty complicated URL, right? But for the ease of sake, so there's a QR code that you can use, and that brings you directly to the Learn Live session. So you can follow us directly or do it afterwards. And there are more modules in the design for site recovery in Azure. So yeah, and remember this is a live session, so ask questions in the chat. And for all means, we also do ask questions and on knowledge check. So stay tuned. This module is the first module of multiple, right? So on a learning side, you can develop your own roadmap, and this module shows you the begin of a design to the site recovery solution in Azure. As part of the overall solution, you find out how to use your services like Azure Site Recovery or Backup or different Azure services that you can use, but also on premises. By the end of this module, you will learn how to keep your workloads running and your data safe. That's important nowadays because you read all about ransom attacks, and backup is more important than ever. You will also use tools like Azure Site Recovery and Backup to design the site recovery solution. And we give field practice tips that come in handy during your plan. So the unit start. As an organization, you will need to adopt a business continue and disaster recovery plan. Now we call it BCDR strategy that keeps your data stay safe is important for your plan. And know who's the owner of the application, who's the owner of the data, and what to do when an outage occur. So if something happens, you need to know who to address and what to do. Therefore, we create a plan, at the business continuing disaster and recovery plan. You need to understand the specific requirements involved in building this site recovery for your environment. A BCDR plan that helps you to restore your applications in case of an event. That could be a natural disaster, it could also be an earthquake, or it could be a technical issue. Somebody deletes the database for samples, or the website is being ruined, and you need to go to a backup. Or if you have a disaster plan in place, you can fail over to the other website. But the number one reason is always security and compliance. Security is important for your backup, right? So the backups needs to be protected from ransomware attacks, and yeah, we see this in practice. That is the number one ask in the environment. So for the disaster recovery plan, it's important to know how much data you can lose or what the downtime is. So the recovery point objective refers to how much data loss is acceptable for your application in case of a disaster. So for samples, you have an application that runs out and they have a problem, but the data loss is more than 30 minutes after recovery. Is that still acceptable? I don't know. It depends on your application. If you have a web shop, well, 30 minutes of downtime and loss of data. Well, maybe your data is your web shop is yeah, not that good. You need to bring some different things in place to make this a smaller time of outage. Recovery time objectives (RTO) is the maximum duration of acceptable downtime for your application. So your application, your website is down maybe for a day, 2 days, 30 minutes, 4 hours, eh? But still there's no data loss, right? So RTO is sometimes less important, sometimes it is important. It depends on your business. Looking at the lower RPO or RTO, that comes out always with a plan. And this plan, well, the lower the scores, the higher the cost. With Azure, you can create this plan like a recovery plan. And yeah, how will that look like? It's something like this. So it's more like a runbook. First, we have the prerequisites, see what is needed for the plan. Second, some test environment, maybe some scripts in place. And we do, of course, always a failover from A to B, see what it happens. And in these little steps, you can bring in your own script or also a checkbox saying, well, let's call maybe the manager. Let's do this, let's do that. So an example for this with the Azure site recovery is here showable. What do you think, Tommaso? Is it something easy to read, easy to do? I don't know. It seems pretty easy, and the numbers are well. The duration is pretty quick, so quick responders are on the other side. Do you think?
Well, I think it's easily doable, or
Yeah, well, uh, I see a lot of recovery plans, and nobody tested this until it's
yeah.
needed.
So yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, that can be challenging, right? So, a
Yeah.
recovery plan makes sure it works. And I will repeat that probably a couple of times. Make
Yeah.
sure it works. While you have control over your downtime, right, and recovery of for your application, sometimes it isn't possible, right? If you're using PaaS services. Tommaso is a master in PaaS services, and we often
Thank you.
have,
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
yeah, we often we often have some conflicts about, hey, should you do that or shouldn't do that? And, infrastructure and developers and PaaS services, well, sometimes there's a conflict, right? So, and on a good way, of course. But the PaaS services, well, they give this own options for availabilities, right? So it depends on SKU, it depends on what you choose, what is your standard in your environment. So that's something to think about. If you're using PaaS services, what do you really need? And do you need a disaster recovery, or is it acceptable that you lose all the data, or for some time, or it's unavailable? Right? That's on your business. Maybe you need to switch from standard to premium SKUs. The site recovery. Site recovery, like I showed here, it's pretty easy. So there's a couple of servers fail over to the other side of the country, and you're done. Well, that's the drawing, right? So, but it's not always that easy. If you look at this, then yeah, millions of questions come up to me. But for you, maybe you think, okay, well, it's easy. I saw the win book, and I can create some scripts and do the magic, right? Again, make sure the plan works. Site recovery can help you to automate your disaster recovery by creating a plan, define how machines are being failed over, the restart in order, is also important. If you have some domain controllers or a website, make sure that everything is online before authentication kicks in, and make sure you do test failovers, right? Testing, 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 and to make sure it works. And yeah, that is really important. And the best part of Azure Site Recovery is if you do a test failover, it's always in an isolated mode. So it's kind of bubble where you do the testing in. And that comes also yeah, with some problems maybe. If you have only a website and it needs an Active Directory domain, then make sure the Active Directory is also in that bubble. Else it doesn't work, right? Authentication, maybe you have a database as a service, a PaaS service, then that database isn't going in that bubble, or you have a different zone, right? That brings me to the next topic, backup, right? Backup is really important, and millions of new things that comes now in during Ignite with the backup because it's really important, and some extra authentication is there. With this structure, you can see Azure Backup is not only for Azure. You see it in a lower section that there's always it's all for also for on-premise service. When you're using on-premises service, you can also use Azure Backup as a recovery method. If something happens on-premise, your backup is in the cloud. Azure VMs can be backupped, SQL servers, SQL, Azure Postgres, SQL file servers. But if you go a little in the middle, the data plane, then you see also the data services. Local redundancy, zero redundancy, zone redundancy, I mean, zero redundancy. GRS, geo redundant, right? So it's all important. And the best part is now we have also an archived here. So you can archive your backup vault for some long time storage. And there are a couple of new things like mutual authentication. Backup vaults are there for storing your backup, and you can use them in one subscription or multiple subscriptions, but there's no way yet for backing up over across subscriptions. The multi-use authentication provides an additional layer of authorization in your workloads. If we go a little bit deeper, then in the past, while we all have all backups and we do it on tape or kind of storage, local storage, but now in the cloud, you make sure that it's all secured, right? So role-based access must be in place and the right access is available during the recovery. On the recovery vault, you can set multi-user authorization or MFA to keep it secure. But remember, the role-based access roles must be properly configured. You don't want to have all owners in the subscription so everybody can access the backup, right? Then if something happens, yeah, you're still maybe your data is still lost. There's an option on the resource guard. They can it's the perfect solution for protect your workloads in the vaults. This keeps all data protected even if the backup administrator credentials are being compromised. So take a look at these Azure resources. Availability sets. Well, we kind of have availability set with Tommaso. So we are two fault domains, right? So my VM is here and Tommaso is on the remote side, right? And yeah, we can fail over. It's like an, a recovery fault, right? So it's could be interesting. We have both the slides running, right? What do you think, Tommaso?
So is this an active passive session or an active active?
Well, we could try to fail over. Let me finish this. After the knowledge check, we will see if we
Okay.
can fail over properly and see if
Yeah.
the disaster recovery plan works.
Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
but for now, the availability sets is a logical grouping. and to ensure that your VM resources are not placed in the same rack in the Azure data center. Because you click it and magic happens, and yeah, you have no clue where the data is, right? And it's somewhere in the Azure data center. But if you want redundancy, then yeah, you have to choose the availability set. And the availability set make up the update domains and the fault domains, like shown in the picture. By placing your VMs in an availability set, your VMs will be automatically spread across multiple fault domains. To keep in mind, the application must not be on a single server. If you have a single server, then that VM can't be spread over multiple racks. Makes sense, but still, people think if I have one VM, I can place it in an availability set, and it is being spread over multiple racks, and that is not the case, right? So you can't spread a machine. So fault domains are represent physical racks, so with its own power, networks, and if you have a data center on premise and you have 10 racks, all with their own power, networks, then basically you have 10 fault domains. An update domain is a logical group. Update domains ensure that your subnet of your application always remain running when the virtual machine host in Azure requires downtime for maintenance. So your VM runs on a kind of hypervisor, and that needs also to be maintained, maybe a reboot, or there's a failure. And if you have a single VM and that server will be rebooted, then it's gone for a couple of minutes maybe, and you have an error in your Azure portal. So therefore, always make your application redundant. See if that is possible, of course. Next, we have zone availability. So zone availability are actually the data centers in the region, or maybe geo regions, if you like. So the availability zones are independent physical data centers locations within the region. So for West Europe, we have multiple regions. Well, it's one in Amsterdam and one in Ireland, I think. By taking availability zones into account when deploying resources, right? So if you have an application and you think it's really important that it keeps running, then you can select an availability zone, and then the workload in case of a disaster will go over to the different region. Servers like virtual machines are zonal services and are able to deploy them to specific zones within the region. Other servers are zone redundant services, and they will replace uh, across the availability zones in the specific regions. So the zone redundancy takes in, if you want, saying, well, this application needs to be on one or two or three zones, like Azure SQL Server or an Azure Virtual One, then there's no failover noticeable, because if something happens, your application keeps running because you have the checkbox saying, well, if I want to have the availability zone 3, then it's being spread over 3 availability zones. So the moment of truth, Tommaso, what do you think? Do they can they handle the questions? Maybe. Well,
Yeah, I think you are explaining it really well. So, well, let's go to the question.
yeah. Let's start with an easy one, right? So this is question number 1. List the difference between Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery. Well, seems easy, right? And identify the scenario where the Azure Backup or Azure Site Recovery should be used. Well, 3 questions, and you can all vote with a URL or use the QR code if you want. So let's wait a second before I pick the answer, or should you answer? Well, I think this is an easy question, right? So, what do you think about answer A, Tommaso?
Ah,
Should you pick that? Should you pick that?
I really don't know. I really don't know. It's maybe it's difficulter
Well,
than more difficult than we thought, or not?
yeah,
What do you
but
think?
maybe if you see Azure backup is only used to protect your on-premise targets, right? So, and I just showed that the backup in this diagram is also for on-premise, but also for cloud, right? So it can be A. Then I skip B because that is the shortest answer most of the time. Well, I don't know, but let's skip that one. Heck, the biggest question, C, site recovery can be used for long-term data, or the backup is only used for short-term data. Well, would you use a backup for short-term data, Tommaso? If you can only store this for a couple of days, that is not really a backup, right?
No. So, well, let's see what the answer is then.
Surprising. It's the shortest answer, right? So, but the other thing is, we have also a question, and that is over availability sets within one availability zone data center. So let me read the question. So the question is availability sets is within one availability zone data center and is not spread across availability zones, correct? So the availability set um, can be used in multiple zones, but this availability set, and I can go back to that specific slide. So the availability set is keeping your workload together, right? So the availability set, you have one VM and another VM running the same workload, and you should keep them together, but not in the same rack. That is the availability zone and the availability set, sorry. So availability zones is meaning that your workload is in, saying West Europe, and it moved to also to Ireland or to a different regions. And in West Europe, there are only 2 or 3 regions, so it's moving across in the same region. But together, right? It's never being used together. So it's there. I don't think there's a at this point a workload that you can use an availability set into in a zone, but it's all tied together, right? So it's based on a workload. So therefore, if you have availability set, it can be spread all across the regions, or it makes a global redundancy by, for example, as your site recovery or different SKU, right? If it's part of a different SKU, or you're using proximity groups, then all the data is being kept together. Hope that answered the question for us. So the second question here is, what are some features that contribute to high availability of virtual machines? Azure features. Well, high availability, we talked about Azure sets, availability zones, availability points. I didn't use that right, Tommaso? Or did I forget something?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let me think about it. I can't remember that you said it.
So yeah, I definitely C is not the answer, right? So, but A and B, well, availability sets and zones, some features, high availability. So what causes high availability? High availability is keeping the machines in different racks or spread them over to different zones, right? So if some disaster happens, then say the data center is gone, then yeah, then I have nothing about availability sets, right? So the whole rack is gone, and then yeah, I will choose B probably, right? So it's if something happens to the data center, then it's being moved to the different data center. So then availability zones with the region pairing would be the correct answer. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think that's the one. Well, let's see.
Perfect. So, and our audience thinks also, but we have a close call. I see it's 50-50 almost. So a lot of people thinking it was availability sets and availability zones. Well, it can be tricky, right? So it's a lookalike, but yeah, but there's plenty of info on the Microsoft Learn site for that. So Tommaso, I think it's your turn, right? Let's see if we can fail over the slides and see if it's working for disaster recovery plan.
Yeah. Well, in this next unit, we're going to talk about Azure Site Recovery as part of your disaster recovery process. And what we are going to do in this unit. So a lot of organizations have multiple workloads, and some of those workloads are running in the cloud, of course, but some still remain on-prem. And to protect those workloads, well, you need to understand how you can use site recovery as part of your disaster and recovery plan, and how you can also use it with other solutions as well. So in this unit, well, we're going to show how you can use site recovery to simplify your disaster and recovery process. And we're also going to see the different types of machines and scenarios that are supported with site recovery. And we're also going to learn how you can use your existing network with site recovery. So site recovery can simplify your disaster and recovery process, and because you can configure with site recovery and manage your application, but also your failover and your failback. And the nice thing is you can do it in the Azure portal. You can also do that with the Azure CLI, and for example, also with PowerShell. So you can manage in site recovery to replicate different types of targets. And when you look at the example, you can see, for example, that when you replicate your machines, you can go from your primary region to your secondary region. And in this case, we're going from East US to West US. But you can also replicate your on-premise machines as well. And also, for example, Azure SQL Server. And so you can have a lot of different types of machines and different locations as well. And so what you can see here is that when you replicate to Azure, the virtual machine disks are also going to Azure storage, and that's to keep them resilient. So that's important to know as well. So in this example, you see a solution that uses both Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery. So you can also combine different services together in one and to make it one solution. And in this example, we have an on-premise environment that uses a Hyper-V server, and the Hyper-V server hosts the virtual machine. And in this example, we want to back up, for example, the files and also the folders that are in the virtual machine, and we want to back them up to Azure. And we also want to protect the workloads that are running on the virtual machines. So here we want to combine different services and different technologies with each other. And we want to run, of course, everything. So when the virtual machine fails, everything has to run together. So here we're going to combine Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery and use that as a single solution. So you can configure both backup and site recovery from a recovery services vault. And then that you see on top of the page, there you see the recovery services vault, and you can combine everything with each other. And for Azure Backup, you first have to identify where your workloads are running and where you want to back them up to. And to be able to do that, you need to install backup agents, and then you can schedule a backup into Azure. And for Azure Site Recovery, you set up your protection goal, and there you can define where the machines are located and where you want to replicate them to. So when you integrate your on-premise network to site recovery, the nice thing is that you can also keep your private IP addresses from your on-prem machines and use them also for your Azure machines as well. And to be able to do that, you have to create a virtual network in Azure and where your virtual machines are going to be provisioned. So when you have a failover. And that VNet, that virtual network in Azure, acts as an extension of your on-premise network. And you also have to be aware that you have to establish a connection to Azure. And you can do that, for example, with a site-to-site VPN or also with ExpressRoute. ExpressRoute is slightly more expensive, but it gives you much more performance. So it's a great way to connect those environments to each other. So we're already at the questions. Well, let's see what the first question is. So this is only one question we have. And to answer that question, you can scan the code, or you can also type in the link. So you can choose what you want to do. Let's go to the question. So this question is, list 3 benefits of using Azure Site Recovery as part of your disaster and recovery process. So you have A is Azure the VM replication, avoiding failovers, and consistency with failover. And B is Azure VM replication, increased RTO, consistency with failover. And C is Azure VM replication, on-premise replication to Azure, or consistency with failover. So these are the possible answers. So we have A, B, and C. Robert, do you already think what maybe a clue what the right answer could be?
Yeah, it could be complicated, right? So it's all lookalike replication all the time, and you just saw the shortest answer. That doesn't give you any guarantee on that is the answer or not, right? So
I
seems
thought it
logical.
was always the longest answer.
Yeah, well, it depends, right? So you saw it in my questions, and we throw the dice, right? So what number it should be, but for avoiding failovers and consistency with failover, answer A, I don't know. It's probably not the best match for that, right? And increase RTO. I talked about RTO and RPO, and often they are being mixed together. Mm, it's tricky, right? So in this case, on-premise replication to Azure, well, that seems always nice. And you talked about express route. I need an express route at home. Would be awesome. And well, consistency with failover. I think I will pick C for samples because the on-premise replication, and you can replicate your infrastructure to Azure with Azure Site Recovery, right? So that is the whole goal
Okay,
of
yeah, that's a good
your
one.
recovery solution, and I will talk about this later also. So I pick C.
Well,
Let's see what the answer is.
let's look what the answer is. Luckily it's C, Robert.
Yeah, well, I have a good dice, right? So it's
Yeah, you get the 5 stars after this session. Well,
yeah. Let's see. I think if I see the polls, the people are also right, and but still there are people are thinking, well, it was B, and for explanation, you can replicate your infrastructure in Azure and achieve app consistency with Azure Site Recovery. But if you want go more in the module, then you will see the answers and more explanation to that.
Yeah, and you have also more questions in the Azure Learn module as well. So if you want to learn more, yeah, you can also go to the Azure Learn module. But we have to continue with the next unit. And Robert, the floor is yours again.
Yes, so build resiliency application services seems complicated, right? So even in the Microsoft Learn module, this is a bigger module, but on sake of time, yeah, we need to trim this a little bit down, and we try to use a lot of practice into the slides and into the story that we tell you, and to give you a head start of not making rookie mistakes, right? So in this unit, you will learn how to use geo redundancy and availability clusters that can help you, yeah, to get more availability for your application. You will see what is involved in the failover and failbacks for your application. You understand why and how you should use or should implement a monitoring and a notification strategy, right? So in case of a disaster, if nothing, no alarm bells goes, or you get zero notification, then yeah, your application may be down for quite some time. So in this unit, you will also learn how to geo redundancy and availability clusters can help you and see what is involved for that. So how would that look like? Then for samples, we have two VMs in the same subnet, and we learn you can be using an availability set, right? An availability set for this. So they are spread over multiple fault domains. Or was it zones, Tommaso? Well, it's in the same subnet, right? So it can't be a zone. That makes it easy. But maybe later in the questions, I will challenge you again. So high availability clustering helps you to ensure your workloads and remain availability within minimal downtime. There are multiple ways to create high availability, right? In the past, my Twitter handle, clustering, cluster MVP, was former cluster MVP for 10 years ago. But running on-premise clusters, that's really hard, right? But nowadays it's a cookie, right? So everybody runs clusters on-premise or using Azure now with availability zones or traffic manager or load balancers. Like here in the drawing, there's a load balancer that keeps the traffic probably from a website or something else separated, and that gives you also redundancy for that machine. You could also use virtual machines or scale sets. So a virtual machine scale set will create an active cluster to scale up and down due to the need of your workload, right? Then you get a sort of elastic workload. If you need more compute, more machines are being uh, scaled up, and that brings you the optimal performance for the customers. The Azure load balancer in the picture works on availability on the port. So if, for example, port 80 is not available, then it's using the left VM, and else it will use the right VM. But if it is that really uptime, mm, well, it could be better, right? So you could use different technologies. And if you're using Azure to make, for samples, your applications redundant or even geo redundant, right? You can use Azure Site Recovery, replicate that application to a geo redundant zone, and that brings you much more availability for that application. But it seems all easy, right? But in this case, if it's on premise, you need a VPN or an express route. You also mentioned this, Tommaso. This express route must be something awesome because it's really expensive for most of
Yeah, that is something
customers.
what you must have also at home.
A must have, yeah, probably. But it's a nice thing, but you can also use the normal VPNs for that. And of course, it comes maybe with limitations, but for 99 percent of the usage, it's good enough. And you can extend your on-premise network to a virtual network that is running a replica of your infrastructure and in a different region aside Azure. So Traffic Manager can also be used for monitoring the health of your on-premise network. But if you're using this cluster, there comes a little caveat in it, and that's probably nowhere in the books or in the Learn section. So if you have Azure Site Recovery and you create a failover for your cluster, then the disk are all standard disk or premium disk maybe. But in the site recovery, the max shares option is never being turned on. So you have to do that by a script. That's it. Is a field tab. So here you see the max shares on 3, but there are 2 or more, and that is based on how many VMs can share the same disk. And in a cluster, if you have a cluster on premises and you do a failover, yeah, sometimes it's a 2-node cluster or 4-node cluster, but you don't need a 4-node cluster in Azure. Only one machine is it's more than enough, or 2 if you want to have the workload that you have on premise also, then you have to enable the max shares. Else your runbook, as I showed before, will fail. That is a good tip. And remember it, because maybe the knowledge check that I will do is over that max share disk. Or not, because that would be too easy, right? So your company is launching a new region, right? You can ensure there's no performance issues for that region. So what would you do then, Tommaso? So you are the application man. So what should we do if we have no
Mm.
performance issues? Should we
Oh,
test something? Should we test something then, or
testing is always good.
testing? Yeah, it's testing. Testing. I'd say, well, in the discovery plan or the disaster recovery plan, make sure it works. So yeah,
Yeah.
then we need to have some eyes, right? So monitoring, yeah, monitoring should be in it, right? So and notifications, if there's no
Yeah.
notification, could be it. So auto scaling, scale up, scale down, could
No, it doesn't.
that could resolve our performance issues if we expect something. But answer B is also monitoring and increase your recovery time objects. Well, that is about recovery. We're talking about
Yeah.
performance issues. We don't want performance issues. We have we want no performance and the maximum performance, right? So if you have no performance, then yeah, the recovery time objects is important. Set up notifications, answer C, and then fill back, fill over for your applications. Well, that could be, but that is more try and error. See if it fails over, and then I think, well, what do you think, guys? I say we go for number A. That seems logical, right? So
Yeah.
monitoring,
Yeah.
notifications, and auto scaling. I didn't talk about auto scaling, but it's a little bit like the VM scale sets, right? So it's an elastic pool, and if you need more compute, then multiple machines will be spent up. And yeah, there are plenty of examples in Azure for doing that, and I think that's answer A, answer A
Yeah.
for sure this time.
Okay. Now let's see if you're right.
Yeah, that was an easy one, probably, right? So I see the photo says is also picked the right one. So yeah, that is not that hard. So
So
the second question. Oh, I have a second question. So that's more like a bonus question. So which of the following resources can be restored from the backup? Well, we talked about backup, and it's not only for on-premise; it's also for Azure. And yeah, network security groups, virtual machines. Well, we can back up virtual machines. Traffic manager, mm. Virtual machines, databases, disks, NCB. Yeah, that sounds logical, right? So it's all the components. If you remember the slides, it was all there, databases and load balancers, subnets. Yeah, actually, there's no reason in Azure to back up networks because it's redundant and it's as a service. So that is not going away. You can't easily delete the subnets because the resource group is gone. VPN gateway, that is also redundant by default. So it's also an easy question, right? So let's see what the voters are. And it should be answer B. And we have a good hit, 100% hit for answer B. That's not that bad, Tommaso, right?
Oh, that's well, that's a good score.
So, yeah, we are in your section, right? So, resiliency data services set. Can you do that?
Yeah. So this is the last unit where we're going to talk about how you can show and build resilient data services. Yeah. So how can you do that? So in this unit, we're going to build resilient data services, and of course, you can take different measures or measures to build resilience for your data. And organizations rely on data, and that's obvious. Where we have a lot of data nowadays in your organizations, and of course, we want to keep that safe. And so how can you do that? Now, for example, you can use always-on availability groups to replicate your data. And we can also have a look at automated backups and also failover, for example, in Azure SQL database. And we're also going to look at Azure Cosmos DB, and that's an whole other type of database. So that we're also going to talk about what is Azure Cosmos DB and what is geo-replication. So that's also a really nice feature, what we're going to show you. So how can you set up a failover in an Azure SQL database? Well, in an Azure SQL database, you can also failover groups to configure the failover and the replication of groups of the databases that are on your database server. And there you can, for example, define policies that can perform the failover. And the policies, they are all based on your needs. And if necessary, what you can also do is always you can also manually trigger a failover as well. So a SQL database auto failover can automatically failover your databases to a secondary server, and that secondary service is located in another region. Sorry. And your endpoint, and that's also really nice that your endpoint that sames this or remains the same when you're having a failover. So when an issue is caused and when you're ready, of course you can always fail back to your original location. So when you look at automated backups for your databases, well, those can be stored between 7 and 35 days. And what you see here in this example is that when that the SQL database uses geo-redundant storage to store the backups, and you can also provide read access to your data in a different region as well. So your databases are safe, even when, for example, something happens to your original region where you are located into, because everything fails back to your secondary region. So you can also have long-term retention policies, and you can even extend the retention backup up to 10 years. So if that's positive, or is that's necessary for your solution, yeah, you can have backup for even 10 years. And you can do that on a single database, but you can also do that on Elastic Pool as well. Well, and to keep everything secure, it also uses encryption. So encryption at rest, so everything is really, really secure. And everything, of course, is done in the background with the database backup. So geo-replication, that's also something what you can use in Azure Cosmos DB. Well, I really like Azure Cosmos DB. I have a developer background, so I played a lot with it. But Azure Cosmos DB is really, really fast. So what is Azure Cosmos DB? Well, it is a low latency multimodal database. So that means that you can have multiple modules. So for example, JSON documents, you can, because it's a NoSQL database, that means that you don't have relational tables in the database, but you can use a SQL-like language. So you can query the database as if it would be a SQL database, but it is in fact a NoSQL database. And in Azure Cosmos DB, you can also have or configure multiple regions. So in this example, what you see here, we have defined West Europe as your primary region, but you can also have multiple regions. So for example, you can replicate everything, well, in this case to East the US. So in this case, we have 2 regions, but you can also have 4. So that really depends on your needs. And when you do that, so Azure Cosmos DB saves that data inside containers, and it makes your database and everything is partitioned, and all those partitions are replicated across the regions. And inside the regions, your partitions are also copied between the fault domains. So that means that everything is at least copied 4 times. So if you have 2 regions, that means that you have 4 times 2 copies of all your data. So that makes it really resilient. Well, let's do the knowledge check. So this is the last question that we have for today.
So we have also 2 really good questions still pending
okay.
in the queue.
Well,
so
let's do them first, because you can also do this in the
on the learn module, right?
Yeah.
So but we don't want to skip anything, but we're going fast over the questions probably, and give the audience a chance on get the questions answered, right?
Yeah.
So the first question is from it all looks great, and but the Azure site recovery, how does it work, right? So can we use partners like a Meraki network, a SDN, or something? So Azure site recovery runs based on agents. You install an agent on the machine, and then it's being replicated. And if you use a virtual one in Azure, or you're using on-premise machines, virtual machines on VMware based or on Hyper-V based, then the agent will take care of the replications to Azure, no matter what network is between it. So it should be all fine, and it works with everything. So at least what I've seen, and if you open the ports, then it works. So the second question is, Tommaso, it's it all looks awesome. I want it, and but what about the cost, right? So site recovery cost. Yeah, well, site recovery cost. It is expensive, right? So if you have multiple machines running, and but yeah, we all know it, Tommaso. If you run something, you pay it by the minute. But if you turn it off, right, then your costs are pretty gone, right? So maybe there's a little downtime if you're using storage, or but for VMs, there's no cost if they are being turned off, and
No.
it's a site recovery, right? So if it's being turned off, then yeah, it
I
costs
think
you
I
almost
think I
nothing.
think you'll only pay for the discs or
Yeah, storage. That's a good point. Storage is always there, right? So because you have to create something, right? But you don't pay for the compute because it's not active running,
no. And
except
I think
if you're using skill sets, right?
and I think discs are not that expensive or when you
No, it's not like that expensive. And remember, that's also a field tip in your site recovery. If you don't use it right now, yeah, it doesn't need to be premium storage, right? So you can also use cheaper storage. And in case of a disaster, you can always change the SKU on the fly, maybe in a reboot or yeah, in your runbook, right? Can also be in your runbook. Then it's also a cost saver then.
that's a really good tip, Robert.
Yeah, so often it's being forgotten on cost. Yeah, well, I don't pay the cost, right? So it's somebody else's credit card. So
Yeah, but it's
but
always good to point out to an organization or a
exactly,
customer
exactly.
that you can save costs.
But we have one knowledge check, I think, right? So
Yeah, do we still have time? I think are we when we
yeah,
go
we have a couple of
some
minutes. So
final minutes. So the question here is, what are benefits of moving your workloads to Azure Cosmos DB? If, for example, you have an online store and that online store is moving to multiple regions. So, A, you will be able to perform row level security with low latency on your data in another region. B, you will be able to have up to 500 databases with low latency access in another region. Or C, you will be able to have read access to your data with low latency in another region. So, Robert, you're not a specialist in platform as a services, but I know you really like it. So what do you think?
yeah, well, I see big numbers, right? So I think 500 databases. That seems a lot, right? With low latency, big machines. I think. Well,
That, that's
answer
a bit.
A probably perform yeah, low level security with low latency on your data in another region. So you want to do in another region with low latencies?
The row level security, that's not something that we talk about. I can't remember
No,
that.
no. But it could be, right? So yeah, I have to say, well, I probably know the answers, right? So it's not really fair. But if I look at the votes, yeah, it's tricky, but I will pick C, and for the reason
Ah,
that you can say, well, let the
oh,
clients in the other region have read access that gives you the
ah,
availability to spread the usage across multiple regions, right?
and you're right again.
See how awesome this is. But make sure you go to the Learn module, right?
Yeah,
There you
yeah. And
can
there you
see
can have extra questions also.
exactly.
We have to do really fast the summary because it's almost time. So what we have learned in this session. So, well, all the options that you have for site recovery and also how to define site recovery for your applications. And also how to select a proper solution. So this module is only an introduction. When you go to the learn module, or you can have even more. So is this, yeah, so this is the next slide. So when you go to the Azure Learn site, you can even do more sessions and you can dive also deeper into, well, these options that we today discovered. You can even dive deeper into them. So that's really great.
Exactly. And if there are still questions left and you didn't have the time to ask the questions, then yeah, please reach out to the Twitter handles, and yeah, we will try to answer the questions anyway for that, because yeah, we are still MVPs and we love the community. And I will thank you for watching this Learn live session. Thank you very much. Don't forget the evaluations, by the way. They are really important to us.
Yeah, and and go to the Azure Learn Live. There you can see also new episodes, and even throughout the year. So, thank you for joining our session. We really liked to do it.
Yeah, and hope everybody learned something from the field notes. And yeah, let's do it again and see you probably in person somewhere, I hope.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.